Welcome to Wealthy Living Podcast. I'm Lisa, your host and founder of Wealthy Living. It is here that I connect with a variety of wonderful humans to have inspiring and insightful conversations to help you live a meaningful, connected and well life. A place to learn and grow in confidence and clarity to make choices that support your well-being, both personally and professionally. Now, mental health and emotional well-being as a topic is getting lots of airtime in the world right now, and rightly so. We're living in a world where anxiety, depression, and suicide rates are continuously rising. So today I have a really special guest with me, Romi Grossberg, who lives in Thailand but is down in Melbourne at the moment for a fantastic conference, the Thinkers Conference, the Cultures of Thinking Conference. And she's here to discuss with me her new book, The Key, a social emotional toolkit for teens. So welcome, Romi.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure. Romi's a trained social worker, an author and a workshop facilitator who specialises in mental health. She works with adults and teenagers online and in person. As an author, this is her third book on social emotional health or emotional intelligence, and a second one for teenagers. So like myself, Romi believes to see a change, we really need to work with a health promotion model where we focus on prevention rather than cure. And she believes that we need to begin the work teaching teenagers self-awareness, emotional intelligence, and practical life coping skills. So Romi, your new book tackles this. Your new book tackles teaching teenagers these things. I've got it right in front of me here. It looks brilliant. It's a whole workbook. It's a whole curriculum and workbook, and is so practical. It's not just a whole lot of theory and information, which is just brilliant and what we need. Can you tell me, how did you come to writing this book?
I suppose because I do counselling for adults and I do counselling for teenagers, and I've focused on different ones at different times. And I've noticed over the last probably 5 or 8 years, counselling adults, what I've noticed that the bottom line essentially is that we're lacking the skills, we're lacking the coping skills to deal with whether it's day-to-day life or stresses, anxieties, understanding sadness, depression. We're throwing around a lot of terms, but we're not understanding what they are. I noticed the word anxiety and depression get thrown around a lot lately, but do we actually understand what we're saying and what we're talking about? And people with depression, anxiety, are they slipping through the cracks because everybody is talking about it? And I love the fact that we are in a day and age where we can talk about these things and it's not as taboo.
Absolutely.
But there's also, we're sort of stepping over a new line where we're talking about it to the point where I think we've lost meaning of what's going on. And so for me, working with adults and realizing that when I try and teach them the skills to handle the different things that are going on in their life, what I've realized is that they actually just didn't have them. And the number one comment I get from working with adults, whether they're 40 or 70 or 80 years old, is, I wish I would have learned this younger. And that's when I sort of came up with the idea of, well, why are we not teaching this younger? So I came to Australia. Like you said, I live in Thailand. I've been in Asia for 10 years. I came to Australia, maybe 5-6 years ago, and I approached Bialik College, which was the top school in the state of Victoria. And I just sort of came to them and said, why are we not teaching this younger? Why is it not in schools? In primary, there's a push to a little bit of meditation, a little bit of breathing, a little bit of yoga. And then we get to adolescence, to teenagehood, to secondary. And I couldn't find anything that was going on. In the last few years, there is a push to put more in secondary schools. But when I was doing my research then, there was nothing going on. And if you look at the psychology terms of everything, teenagehood, adolescence from the age of like 12 to 18 is all about the developmental stage of identity. So they're looking for their identity. Who am I and where do I fit in the world? And then there's no support systems in place. So for me, my aim was really to work myself out of a job counselling adults by upskilling teenagers to lead healthy lives emotionally, mentally, spiritually, physically. So that's the very long version, I suppose, of how I came up with writing this book in the first place.
Yeah, and it's fantastic, and it is. It's looking at, well, what are the problems that you've been seeing over and over again, and how do we address them like we talked before? And I said in the intro of looking at it more of a health promotion model than looking at it like you as a therapist for adults once they've sort of finding it really hard in certain life situations. So really skilling up our teenagers. So hopefully when they get to adulthood, like you said, you're out of a job and you're not having to necessarily go over these same things that could be addressed if they were learnt earlier.
Yeah, and I found the older my clients, the more upset I got by it personally. I've worked with 70 and 80-year-olds that have said at the end of the session, where were you 60 years ago? I mean, that's 60 years of pain, 60 years of carrying around, whether it was an abuse of sorts, whether it was being bullied at school, something went on with their family, and they never had the courage or didn't find the right person to talk to or whatever it is. But it was just too upsetting to let that continue when the work that I do is very grounded. It's very practical, and there is something everyone can do for all of these different things, and there's absolutely no reason why people can't learn it. Yeah,
and I know a lot of your work, and you do have such a grounded, practical approach. And, this book, along with your other book, The 5-Minute Emotional Intelligence, is so practical and grounded and can be used by parents and educators and obviously the teens themselves to work through to gain the skills. So if we look at the book, what are you most trying to achieve?
I think at the beginning I was looking at this book in terms of raising the self-awareness of teenagers. It's a difficult age to raise self-awareness because their world is very small in that it's all about me, and then it's all about friends. So, parents go from being the heroes when the kids are up to, 11, 12 years old, roughly, to even sometimes being the enemy because it's more important what your friends think than what your parents think when you hit adolescence. So raising self-awareness right through to creating behaviour change. Because the key is to create behaviour change.
Oh, yeah.
So if you create self-awareness, because obviously nothing happens without being aware. If we don't know what we're doing, if we don't know where we are or who we are, then we have no ability to create change. So for me, it was about really starting with the basics of self-awareness and going through to creating behaviour change so that you can change the things that you don't like, that don't make you feel good, and learn to grow with the things that do make you feel good.
So really getting them to really understand themselves, really understand why they do things, what their values are, what triggers them, how they respond, being a witness to themselves, all of those things.
There's lots of memes and things going around about things that we can control versus things that we can't control. And that's a great little starting point almost for self-awareness because, when we have a tantrum or a breakdown or we feel anxious or stressed, we're trying to control the things that are outside our control. So even just stopping and looking at, what's within my control and what's out? Like I can't control what you think of me if you like me. I can't control what others think. I can't control the weather. I can't control someone dying. I can't control those things. But I can control how I react, how I respond, how I behave, how I think, how I feel. I actually am in full control of all of those things. All of those things are choices, and I don't think adolescents or adults very often understand that all of these things are actually choices. If you are having a shitty day, it is your choice to stay in that place, or it is your choice to get out if you have the skills to get out.
Yeah.
And look, life happens and things happen, and sometimes we have bad days and bad news and bad reports and all that kind of thing. But we choose how we react and respond to all of these things. And having choice is a really important thing to remember.
Yeah, a key thing that I picked up that you just said then is having the skills to get out. So knowing that we have a choice and being able to feel like we have a choice in the circumstance are often two different things because we can hear someone like you get up within a classroom situation and say exactly what you've just said to me to a class of teenagers or even to adults or actually to anybody of any age. And we can theoretically understand that we have a choice, that there are things within our control and things that we don't have control over. But having the skills to be able to make a choice is different than knowing we've got a choice. So what sort of stuff do you teach teenagers or anybody in that circumstance what sort of skills or tools can be used to actually make a choice.
Yeah, and look, there's lots of different skills and techniques depending, I suppose, on the topic, excuse me, or the level of anxiety or stress around it. Things like learning how to breathe. And I know that sounds a bit airy-fairy, but if we can't breathe and calm ourselves down, then we can't think clearly. So you start with the really simple things like breathing, and even in my book there's lots of videos attached. There's 3 different types of breathing techniques within the book that you can go to, either belly breath, learning how to take a deep breath, breathing with colours, and mindfulness meditation. So learning how to breathe, learning how to calm yourself so that you can think clearly. Noticing things like when we're particularly tired or particularly hungry, we can't think clearly. We get super agitated. They're all simple things. We can stop and breathe. We can make sure we're well rested. We can eat well. So they're the sort of the basic simple things. When kids are not sure that they can address something, it's about breaking it down. A lot of the teenagers that I work with, their feedback is, Romi helped me gain perspective, which is quite an adult, mature comment.
Very.
I get this from 12-year-olds and up. Perspective is really important because when we're feeling stressed, everything feels out of perspective. When I'm teaching things around negative thoughts and anxiety, perspective comes into play again because these things feel real, and it's about understanding yourself and understanding the difference between thoughts, feelings, and reality. Because what's actually going on can be quite different to what we think is going on and to how we feel about what's going on. So it really does require sitting down and actually breaking it down and teaching it bit by bit by bit in very practical steps with very real examples of what kids go through on a daily basis, or adults when I'm working with adults, to see the difference. And guaranteed by the end of the session, they're all like, okay. And a lot of that work is around anxiety stuff when we're talking about the difference between what's real and what we think, because anxiety takes what's real and makes a big mess of it. And then we get all anxious because we've lost sense of reality.
Okay, so in a classroom situation or just in a group situation, and you've got kids, I mean, we're looking, from what I understand from what you're saying, it's looking at the difference of their truth versus their truth. Because to them, it feels real. Doesn't mean that it necessarily, like you said, in reality is real. So what sort of tools or what sort of conversation is being had or can be had as a parent or an educator with a child or a teenager to help them see the difference? Because when you feel something, you feel it so strongly that you really believe it.
Absolutely. And
to tell someone, especially a child or a teenager, that it's not true can be quite shame-orientated or make them feel less, or that their thoughts or that their feelings are unworthy, and then it can actually contribute to a worse problem.
So, and it's not that their feelings are unworthy, it's just helping them see the separation.
So how do you do that?
I will, a lot of repetition with teenagers, because the first time they look at you like with that, that blank look of I don't believe you, then you see them start thinking, maybe I'll give it a go. And then we actually go through real life examples. So I might do a fake real life example of something that kids always go through until the kids have courage themselves to bring up real life examples. Or we'll brainstorm real life examples on the board till there's one that's kind of common amongst the kids. If it's a one-on-one session in counselling, then we'll do whatever the actual scenario is. Something like anxiety, it's about really understanding the difference between what's real. And I will, I suppose, keep asking the same questions until they start hearing my question. So, for example, if you're feeling anxious about something, there is a 3-step process that you can actually do that will bring you back into reality. So we'll pick whatever the scenario is and we will actually go through the process so that they feel what it feels like to go from feeling anxious to feeling calm.
So is that 3-step process really long, or is it something you can, within a couple of minutes, share with us?
I can give you the very quick overview. So the way I look at it, and I do have, like I said, I have lots of different videos on my website that relate to the book. So the anxiety, there is one, Let's Understand Anxiety, and everyone is welcome to go and look at it whenever they like. And that sort of step one is grounding. Okay, so anxiety in a nutshell, and without making it sound more simple than it is, because it is complex, but in a nutshell, anxiety is when your mind goes ahead too quickly for you to kind of keep up into what we consider the worst case scenario. So you're going into an exam and you've imagined the worst case scenario of what could happen. And you've taken your mind there to the point where it feels real, like that is going to be the outcome, and then you can't cope. What you're actually doing is you're still sitting here, like maybe you're still sitting at home, you haven't even gone to school yet. You're sitting here, your mind has gone a million miles an hour ahead of you, and you've decided on the worst case scenario, that's what's going to happen. And we get anxious about it because we're imagining something that's going to happen that's not necessarily true, but now it feels like our truth. Mm-hmm. And then we have the tantrum with the parents. I'm going to fail. What's the point? I'm not going to school today, or whatever it is, or I'm sick, or we make something up, whatever it is. So the first thing is grounding, because what's happened is your mind has gone far away. So grounding brings your mind back into the present moment. So grounding is really easy. You literally can touch the ground. You can touch your body, your skin, because in Ayurvedic medicine, skin and body is grounding. So you touch what is there and you physically name what you see out loud. So if I was sitting here where I am, I would touch the ground and I would say, I can see my book, the key, a table, a black chair, a glass of water, my mobile phone and your laptop. Because I'm naming out loud what I'm seeing, I've brought myself back into the present moment.
Yeah.
So I've gone from being a million miles an hour out there to being right here.
Yep.
Okay, so that's brought me back. And that's step one. So that's pretty easy. Anyone can do it in 15 seconds. Step one has brought me back. Step two is breathe. I couldn't have breathed when I was a million miles an hour in front of myself.
Hence the hyperventilation of anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah. So bring yourself back. Now I'm here. I'm present. And now I'm like, okay, now it's a bit easier to actually breathe. So now I'm breathing. And then I ask myself questions. What do I know to be true? What are the facts? So that's what you ask yourself. What do I know to be true? What are the facts? Right now, what do I know to be true? I have an exam today. Okay, what are the facts? Well, the exam exists and it's going to start at 9 o'clock. What else? There's usually nothing. Kids at the beginning will be like, well, I'm going to fail. Well, no, that's not a fact. Is it a fact you're going to fail? Well, no, not really. Okay, so what is the fact? The fact is the exam exists. What else is a fact? They can't find anything else. I'm sitting in a chair. I haven't got to school yet. These are facts, okay, but none of them are scary. Can you see how all of a sudden when you come back to what do I know to be true? So I'm not saying your thoughts, your feelings, your fears, your anxieties are unfounded and silly. I'm just saying what's true in this moment.
That's great.
And all of a sudden, you're like, okay, so I have an exam today, okay, and anything is possible from this point on. And all I know is that there is an exam, and I'm breathing, and okay, I'm going to go and see what happens. Can you see how you sort of bring yourself back, you calm yourself down, you look at what's true, and you realize that the truths are not that scary, and it actually calms your anxiety right down. Yeah,
that's great. That's a really simple, effective way of really helping somebody to differentiate the truth from their truths without necessarily invalidating them. So
absolutely, and you can do all of that literally within 20 seconds to a minute or a few minutes, and all of that happens quite quickly.
Yeah, and when you did teach these sort of skills within the school using your book, was the feedback from the students themselves that they were able to start practicing that in their day-to-day lives and found it effective?
When I'm teaching in the schools, I try and get them to practice really small things at a time. So I would start with, say, breath work. So let's breathe. Let's do 3 deep breaths when you wake up in the morning and 3 deep breaths before you go to bed at night. Mm-hmm. And let's start there. So making it really, really small, because if I give you 100 things to do and every week I give you another 10, nothing's going to happen. And I find, especially with individual clients who, every week I check back, are you doing it? The difference is huge. I worked with a girl who she would wake up in the morning and her first thought was, today is going to be as bad as yesterday. What's the point? That's how she woke up every day.
Oh, that gives me...
Yeah, really tough. And she was struggling at school and she didn't have a lot of friends and she was being bullied, and that's how she woke up every day. So we started really small. Can you take 3 deep breaths? Put a Post-it note on your bed. Wake up, look at it. Can you take 3 deep breaths? We literally started there. And she did it every day. And every day, first thing and last thing in bed. And after a week, she said to me, I wake up and I think to myself, why should I get up? Today is going to be crap like every other day. And then I think I better do my breathing because otherwise I'll get in trouble from Romi, which is fine. And she does her breathing. And then the next thing she thought was, maybe today will be okay. So just that tiny shift in mind allowed her to get out of bed and go to school with an attitude of it might be okay versus today's going to be a disaster. And if you go to school with the attitude of it might be okay versus it's going to be a disaster, you're going to have a different kind of day.
Yeah.
So you start really, really small when you're working with teenagers.
Yeah, amazing. So if we go back and look at the book, which is beautifully in front of me, and I know that you can't all see this, but can you give a brief rundown? I mean, it is done as a curriculum or as a toolkit for teenagers to use on their own, or for parents to help use with their children. What are you covering mainly in this curriculum? Because it is divided into sections.
Yeah, so I've divided it into friendship, and then me, and then family. So I started with friendship because, like I said before, adolescence is kind of all about friendships, and friendships are the most important things that, that's where we make all our decisions from, is based on what friends think. So I started there and really looking at what kind of friend are you? What's your role in that friendship? Because we're very quick to blame everyone else, but we don't often look at ourselves and what is our actual role in friendship? What are we doing? What's important to us? What do we need? What do we want? Are we being honest? Do we have to censor ourselves before we speak? All those kinds of things. Do we do extracurricular activities? What kinds of friends are we meeting? Is it important to us? So we start with friendships. We look at jealousy and envy. We look at bullying. We look at making apologies and compliments, values, empathy. So we run through a whole bunch of stuff using friendships as the basis for that, so that they can understand that in context. From friendships, we move into the section of me. So there's 3 sections, and section 2 is me. And me is all about me, which is great too. We're teenagers. It's all about me. We look at tone of voice. I love tone of voice. It's totally one of my favourite topics, because we look at the tone of voice we use when we talk to other people and what a massive impact something so simple has. How you can end up in an argument just by the tone of your voice.
And that's just not with kids and their friendships. That's
Everybody.
With relationships.
Oh my
that's
God. I teach
everything.
it to adults too, in communication
absolutely.
relationship workshops that I run with adults. Same thing.
Oh, if you put a recorder on in your house,
you'd be
and
devastated.
I'd be devastated to listen to myself.
It's amazing.
I know when I'm triggered, my tone of voice can completely.
Look, I was with my dad the other day, and I talked to him horribly in the morning. I was screaming at him. And I heard it. I couldn't stop, even still, and I teach it. I was exhausted. I was stressed. It was 7 a.m, and I snapped. So we do it. Now, I could have said the exact same thing in a nice tone of voice, and we could have had a pleasant morning over a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So it was my choice to do that. So we have to really be aware of tone of voice in talking to other people, but also, as importantly, tone of voice when we talk to ourselves, our self-talk. So our self-talk and tone of voice when we talk to ourselves really has a huge impact on how we feel when we use our tone of voice, the choice of language, positive or negative, body language. All of these things affect the way we feel about ourselves and our self-esteem and negative thoughts. And so they all work together. So in the section of me, we look at tone of voice, we look at choice, talk a lot about choices and the choices that we make, and how we are actually making choices pretty much every few minutes of the entire day. And are we making good choices? And what are those choices based on? Is it what we want? Is it what our friends want? Are we learning to trust that inner voice of ours? All those kinds of things, especially in teenagers, when we get sidetracked, we listen to other people, we worry what other people think. So how do we learn how to trust that inner voice of ours? How do we trust our gut? especially when we're a teenager, when it's very, very difficult to trust your gut over follow the herd.
Yeah.
So we talk about choices.
So when you say that, the word that comes straight to my head is values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you did mention that the section on friendship just before, when you went quickly through, that values came up there. But does values come up in all the different areas? And how much do you need to work on really understanding your own values?
Yeah.
In making all of your choices?
Totally. And you're absolutely right, because all the topics do cross. So you're talking about one topic and then I'll say this refers back to page whatever and this refers back to page this and we'll learn this there. And it's almost like if I could write a book in a circle, that's how I would write this book, because it just kind of goes round and round and round and everything relates to each other. But choices it's a tough one, because when we're talking about values, it's completely related. Because values is the section on values, we look at what are all your values. I list like 50 or something values, I think 44 values, for them to circle and then think about and talk about and discuss why are these values important to me. And then when we go into the choices section, are the choices that I'm making in line with the values that I have? And we'll take it a step further when we're talking about trusting yourself and trusting your gut. How do we know when the choices we're making are or aren't in line with our values? Is how do we listen to that voice inside? How do we listen to our gut? And if you have that kind of sick feeling, you know within yourself that the choice you're making is going against the value. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it all goes in a circle. And then there's about, I think, 5 or 6 exercises and activities actually in that section where they're given a scenario and then they have to brainstorm what would they do? What are the positive outcomes? What are the negative outcomes? What do they choose? Why did they choose it? And do they trust that choice? Because you can still make a bad decision and you know in yourself, but you still might do it. So there'll be a scenario, your friend wants you to steal the chocolate from the milk bar. There'll be a scenario, somebody's asking you to bully someone else in the classroom or tease someone, but you have a sick feeling in your stomach. What happens if you do? What happens if you don't? How do you feel when you go against yourself? So, because there are positive and negative repercussions to everything. People might think you're cool. You might make more friends. People might be afraid of you and not want to talk to you. Which of those is more important to you? What are your values? Gets so interesting. Oh, my God, I love it.
I'm excited just hearing about it because I love this stuff too.
Yeah.
So, and I can imagine. So for those that don't know, Romi, when she was writing this book, did a initial run, like you said in the beginning, with Bialik College, where it was your kind of first draft of the book, and you really got to experience what worked, what didn't, before you did the final draft, which is available now. And I'm really interested to know what really did work and what really didn't work because these are big topics with so many layers to them and so much cross-referencing, like you said, like if you could do it in a circle and it goes layer and layer and layer and layer. So, what, as an adult, it can be quite complex. So as
absolutely.
Teenagers, to be learning this stuff, how much did they comprehend? How much didn't they? And what did you find was most struggle teaching?
It was really interesting. I taught it to 12 and 13-year-olds for 2 years in a row. I had 100 kids in last year and 100 kids the year before. And so I did all of these topics with all of them and then got a lot of feedback from them. We did lots of feedback sessions to see how they were going. Things that I found, not that I found easy, but things that had quick outcomes allow, if you do something and you succeed quite quickly, you feel good and you want to do it again immediately. What
a surprise in this instant gratification generation.
Things like that, like tone of voice. And look, they looked at me very skeptical a lot of the time, which I found funny because I was that kid. I'd look at the teacher and roll my eyes like, seriously, you want me to do that? I was kind of that horrible teenager in the classroom. So things like tone of voice. So, in fact, lesson 1 was tone of voice. Like absolute first lesson. They meet me, we talk about tone of voice. What I did was I gave them homework. So we talked about tone of voice and we also talked about if you're at home, and the scenario that I give them is if you are at home doing your homework, you're only going to ask for help if you've hit a point where you are tired and frustrated and can't do it. Otherwise, you don't ask for help because you've done it. So what frame of mind, and I brainstorm with them, what frame of mind are you in? How are you feeling when you're about to go and ask for help? You're frustrated, you're tired, you're annoyed, you're all of these things, and then you go and ask for help. So what tone of voice do you use when you're feeling that way? So you can imagine not a very nice tone of voice, and they role play it. Then we'd role play the flip side of, could you take a step back, even take one breath, calm down, don't yell across the house, stand up, walk over to mum or dad or brother or sister and say, hey, listen, can you give me a hand with something? You can say the exact same words, different tone of voice. So they can see immediately there's a different outcome. And then for 7 days, I say to them, just for 30 seconds at the end of the day, notice. Don't even change it. Don't even do anything about it. Just notice what you did with your tone of voice. That's it. 7 days later, we sit together again. What did you notice about your tone of voice? Oh, my God, the answers were amazing.
Can you give me some?
I'm not arguing with my brothers and sisters. Mum helped me with my homework and then took me out for ice cream. So they were not only getting help, they were getting rewarded by watching an extra TV program together as a family, sitting together as a family, doing something together, and not arguing in the house. I had parents come to me and say, what have you done to my child? He's not being argumentative anymore. What happened? I mean, the change was amazing. So that's just 7 days of noticing for yourself what's going on.
Which really comes back to what we were saying right at the very beginning of this conversation, and that it starts with self-awareness. Mm-hmm. So that's a really great tool to actually come back to really being self-aware. Yeah. And I suppose it borders on that whole idea, which is a bit of a buzzword, but of mindfulness, really, isn't it? It's about being mindful in everything that we do, not just necessarily mindful meditations, but mindful of our tone, mindful of our language, mindful of our body language, etc.
And so it's also going from self-awareness and then through repetition into creating behaviour change, which is amazing. Some confusing feedback I got was we all hated the breathwork and meditation. Collectively, 100 kids, it was the worst subject. And I was a bit like, oh, really? Come on, breathwork meditation, super important. Hated it. But the next question I said was, what is the one thing you are going to take into your life next year, the year after, the year after? And they all said the meditation and the breathwork. So I don't even know what to do with that information. But I don't know, just being teenagers. I don't know. I think maybe it was uncomfortable or they thought it was silly, but they all saw how it benefited them to be able to talk to a teacher that they were afraid of, maybe, to calm down before a test. If they'd had a bad day at school, if they'd had a fight with a friend, they would practice a little bit of breathing and realise that it did work, even though for whatever reason they didn't like learning it. Well,
that's a lesson in itself, isn't it? There's a lesson to say that sometimes things that give us benefit aren't always things that we enjoy.
Absolutely. And there was another couple of things that I think of is one was it's a really, really scary exercise that I get them to do. Oh, my God, most adults can't do this, is I get them to stand in front of the mirror. They have to stand in front of the mirror for 1 minute without fidgeting and hold their eye gaze. Now, that is tough. That is tough for adults. It's very tough for teenagers. The idea is to see what they see and then write about it. There's a lot of writing therapy in the book and activities and exercises and videos, but it's write down what they see and then write down how they feel about what they see.
I've done those exercises with female clients of mine, some similar stuff.
And for me, some of the boys, when boys were a bit younger, in the younger end of teenagehood, the boys were like, I didn't get it. You know, I always look in the mirror. I was brushing my teeth. I fixed my hair. Some of the girls, though, it was really interesting. You know, there was one particular sort of 13-year-old girl that noticed a scar on her neck or her chin or something, and she couldn't see past it. She just couldn't see anything else. Once she recognised the scar, it kind of blemished everything else in her face and she was unable to see past it. And when I asked, could she see the clarity of her eyes or the silkiness of her hair or the honesty in her smile, she couldn't see any of those things and she got quite emotional. So then her and I had a chat on the side where she was going to go back home and see if she could see past that. So that was really beautiful. It was quite an emotional moment, and she did it in front of the class, which I thought was unbelievably brave of her.
Very.
I just thought that was really super beautiful of her to do that. I thought that was really cool.
And I think that those group sharings as well is teaching about the benefit of being vulnerable in front of others and what can come out, and that what's personal is universal.
Yeah.
And that, you know, maybe today one student might not have been able to share, but as soon as another person shared on a similar story, it gave them then the inspiration and courage to be able to share too.
And what she shared was possibly what many other people in the room were thinking and didn't have the courage. So she got to open them up in a way that she probably doesn't know about. So I thought that was really, really brave and really beautiful of her. And one of the other quick things, divorce was a big topic.
Wow.
And I know some schools, particularly if they have religious undertones to the school, they're not interested in when they look at the curriculum and they see things like divorce. It's only one section on divorce. I get that in religious societies they don't want to sort of admit to it, talk about it. The reality is I think it's 30 to 35% of Australian families divorce. It's up to 50 in America. It's around 35, 40 in the UK. Divorce exists. And one of the issues is that kids often feel like it's their fault, or they feel torn, or they get caught in the middle of the fighting. So there's a section on divorce in terms of how to look after yourself when your family is going through something and they're not quite able to look after you the way that they would like to because they're too caught up in it themselves. And one of the feedbacks that I got from a 12-year-old boy was, after a big argument, like him and I, we went to battle. He argued with me and he said, but what if my parents' divorce was my fault? And I was a little bit shocked, and we argued backwards and forwards. And the end of the term, so after 10 weeks, he wrote me a letter and said that I now believe that my parents' divorce was not my fault. And I was in tears.
Oh,
yeah, beautiful. So you can get there. And for me, this book is, one, it's a resource for school counsellors, for school teachers, for school admin, for anyone that encounters teenagers that come to their office in distress.
Absolutely.
It's a fantastic resource for parents to have. There is enough information in it now, different from the one I taught at Bialik, because it's now more full, that any teacher can teach it. I don't expect that any teacher or parent has specialised knowledge in mental health. So for anything like that, like anxiety, negative thought behaviour, creating positive affirmations, breathing, all of those topics, how to find a counsellor, super important, how to find the right person. All of them have videos. There's 15 videos attached to the book that are on the website. And so there is a video that explains, where do we feel anxiety, how, what can we do for ourselves, how do we get help, for all those different topics. So for me, it's about getting it really out into the world, eventually translate into every single language in the world. But any teacher can teach it, any parent can go through it, and there is enough information, particularly for mid and older teenagers, that they can actually go through the book themselves without the need of someone else. It's kind of like a go-to guide. And then there also is help on how do you seek counselling if you need to.
So much, and there's so much more that I want to talk about, but we're going to run out of time. There is a topic I would have loved to address, which was empathy, because that's one of the biggest things in emotional intelligence, and it's a really hard one that we struggle with kids and younger kids. And when does empathy actually even come in?
Yeah, and look, very quick nutshell, I suppose, the section on empathy in my book starts small and ends big. So we start with, do you remember a time that you were upset and somebody came and sat with you because they noticed that you're upset? That's showing empathy. We all have experienced that. So they're like, okay, no, I do remember that, and I've done that for them and they've done that for me. Being aware of outside myself what's going on in other people's lives. So it starts really small with that. And what can you do for a family member this week without being asked? What can you do for a friend? And then it gets bigger and bigger of what can you do, for your country, for the world? Is there a cause in the world that you're passionate about that you could do something about? So we start with very, very small, so it's very tangible, and then we get bigger and bigger and bigger into actually where do I fit in the world and what can I do to empathise with other people. You don't have to know the other person to empathise with them.
There's so
Very full
much.
and juicy.
I know. I want to keep going, and I want to talk so much more about, this whole topic. I love it. It interests me so much, and I love the idea of an integrated approach where people can do stuff on their own, like the teenagers, and I'm sure this actually could be used for not just teenagers, and parents getting involved, and the educators and the counsellors, and that real integrated approach, because I don't think that this stuff just comes from one place, and to have it as a resource so that everybody can use it and everybody can be on a similar page and discussions can be had is just amazing. So your work is just incredible, and I'm so grateful in your very limited time in Melbourne, only a couple of days, that you're able to come and meet with me and have this conversation and share so many of your incredible insights. I'd love to keep going, but I'm really, really aware of your limited time.
That's
so,
right.
Thank you so much. And you're just doing incredible work. And I'm really looking forward to seeing your vision of getting this out there to every school and translated, like you said. I'm really looking forward to seeing that vision actualized.
Me too.
Yeah, and I'll definitely help you where I can. So thank you, everybody, for listening to today's episode. Romi and I would love to hear from you. We'd love to know what your biggest takeaway or insight is from today's conversation. Please leave a comment and let us know. If you'd like more information on Romi, you can follow her on social media under Romi.
Yeah.
Romi.
On my website is romigrossberg.com.
Yep, and on your social media?
Everything. Romi Love Life is Instagram, and Romi Grossberg /writer is my Facebook one.
Fantastic. And I'll put all those links underneath the episode as well. But you can go to her website and there's all information on her latest book, The Key, then a social emotional toolkit for teens, as well as her other books she's written and any upcoming workshops, as well as her counselling online and in-person sessions if you happen to be in Thailand. Lucky you. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and consider subscribing to the Wealthy Living podcast on iTunes so that you can listen to more conversations with wonderful humans whose stories, knowledge, tools and wisdom can help you live a meaningful, connected and well life, both personally and professionally. So thank you, Romi.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. Lovely to be here.
So I'm Lisa, an integrated life, clarity and wellbeing coach, a workplace wellbeing consultant, conversation facilitator and an event creator and host. To find out a little bit more about my services, you can visit my website at www.wealthyliving.com.au or connect with me on all my social media channels. So until next time, remember, connection is medicine.